What's up, everybody? Welcome to the CanesInSight podcast powered by Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Happy Friday. This was a huge day for a lot of college football fans. The first official trailer for NCAA Football, EA Sports got people going crazy. Of course, the Canes were featured prominently. We'll talk about that a little bit. Also, some real football. We'll dig into some of Miami's new transfers from Marshall. This is the transfer spotlight, which we've been doing. We had a great episode with Sam Brown yesterday. Today, we'll be breaking down some of Marshall's transfers, Elijah Alston and Dyoni Hill, with Luke Creasy, a Marshall beat writer who did an awesome job breaking these guys down. I also talked a little bit about Shedis Jackson, Lance Guidry, so you definitely want to stick around for that. First, I want to talk about the folks who don't have to worry about going anywhere. They're not going to take a decade-long break like NCAA football. That is Anijar and Levine Accident Attorneys. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, you could be entitled to significant compensation. Dial 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733, and take back control of your life with Anijar and Levine. All right, Pio, let's bring you in here. I know you're jacked up about this one. NCAA football's back. The trailer's out. Showing it right here on the show. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so remember, again, it's technically not called NCAA football. It's EA Sports college football because the NCAA, is not really involved in this whole thing here in the era now of college football, of NIL, which it's going to be interesting to see which players are in the game and which players aren't. We've already talked to a couple guys today. One of them said he wouldn't be in the game. Another one said he would be. So I think that, this isn't going to be 100% participation rate here. But as we have the trailer playing, and I'll show just the Miami part that's in it in a second. But it's the first thing I was like kind of mind blown by was seeing the players' names on the back of the jerseys. That's always been the thing, right? I mean, you could download the custom rosters online. They would always have pretty updated ones. But seeing that is awesome. The graphics look cool. And then just getting into some of the features, D, because I know there's a lot of people that are going to be playing the game, right? Obviously, you have Dynasty mode. Online Dynasty is always cool. Getting it, you can play with other people, play with your friends. Each of you lead a program. But to me, the interesting thing in the game this year, D, is the transfer portal, obviously. What is the frequency going to be like in terms of how many guys are going to want to transfer? How can you get them back into the fold? If you're at a smaller school, because I know there's a lot of people out there like to start at the smaller schools and build up, right? Are they going to want to leave their star player after, a great season? If you're at a big school and you land a 5-star recruit and he doesn't play much early on, is he just going to immediately hit the door? So that sort of stuff, I'm really excited to see how that turns out. And then the playoff, obviously NCAA 14, that was the last time the game was out. Playoff was not a part of college football just yet. So that whole process of going through and, getting down to the Final Four teams, I'm sure people will get, upset when they aren't chosen there. But now we're going to have the 12-team playoff. So it's going to be, that part of it's going to be really exciting. Looking forward to that big time. Obviously, Road to Glory is back, which is the mode where you take over, you create your guy, go through the recruiting process, pick your school. That's going to be cool as always. But I'm a dynasty guy, as I know a lot of people are. And let me just bring this up real quick, D, and then we'll move on to the next topic. But I need to bring up, here it is. Here's the quick clip from the trailer, Canes related here, as you see it. Mark Fletcher there, throwing up the U. You have, it looks like Marquise Lightfoot's number 12. And, we don't know if he's actually in the game. And then Ruben Bain, also there, number 4. I would expect for him to be in the game as a prominent player. But, yeah, man, excited. I could go on for days about this. And we'll keep dropping nuggets as they come.
Yeah, look, I'm from the Bill Walsh college football era. If anybody out there is old enough to remember that one. And that one didn't even have, the NCAA license. I mean, you had, I remember I would play BYU, and BYU would be Provo, because that was the school,
right,
the city where BYU was. So, I learned where every college football team was. College Station at Texas A&M. I learned all that just because the game couldn't call the university what it is. So, we've come a long way now with the player names on the back. I texted my wife out of the blue. I said, I think it's time to get our sons a PS2 or PS. What is it now?
PS5 now, man.
That's how I do it. A PS5. They had the Nintendo Switch, but I told her it was a good time to get the PS5. She was blindsided by the request. I she's watching this podcast, she probably figure out why I'm so excited to do it. I got to get back into it myself. But again, that'd be fun. The Canes have some good guys this year. The ratings should be good between Cam Moore, Damian Martinez, Restrepo, Ruben Bain, the Malinois, some brand name players. Miami hopes to keep adding some of those, at least one more of those from the portal. We'll keep an eye on Tyler Barron. If that happens, you will hear an instant reaction pod from us. Last I heard, as of yesterday, Miami felt good about Tyler Barron. This was yesterday evening, but everybody knows this is a crazy process. The portal can surprise you, so we'll see what happens there. But switching gears back to real football, Miami has two players who may very well be in the game. There were Marshall last year, cornerback Dyoni Hill, and then defensive end Elijah Alston, who was spotlighted by Mario Cristobal at the ACC meetings. Mentioned him by name as a guy that really impressed in spring. We talked to Luke Creasy, Marshall beat writer, who's going to break down their games and tell us a little bit about what they did at Marshall and how they might project to the next level. So really enjoyed that interview. By the way, shout out to Caneswear for this shirt. I keep wearing this shirt. It's like my favorite shirt right now. But Caneswear's got this, plenty of other stuff, Florida Panthers, Inter Miami, you name it, they got it, caneswear.com. So without further ado, let's talk to Luke.
All right, excited to be joined now on the Canes Insight Daily Podcast by Luke Creasy, Marshall Athletics beat writer for HD Media, the Herald Dispatch, and WV Gazette Mail. Luke, appreciate you joining us today. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. There's been a ton of crossover between Miami and Marshall, really, quite frankly, the last couple of years here, but dating, back years, it seems like there's guys who have transferred there from Miami, guys from the South Florida area who have ended up there and had great careers. So a lot to talk about today. Appreciate you joining us. I'm going to pull up your Twitter page here for the fans who are watching today. Go and follow Luke. Here's his page. But once again, Luke, excited to have you on today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for asking.
So, D, I'll let you start because I know we'll start with Dyoni Hill, obviously the cornerback who comes over recently to Miami, one of the recent transfers here. So, D, I'll let you start here with a question for Luke.
Yeah, Luke, I appreciate you joining us. Miami's really kind of becoming Marshall South in a lot of ways. And before I even get to Dyoni Hill, I want to ask you about Chevis Jackson, who was obviously his coach at Marshall, now the defensive backs coach, really working with the corners at the University of Miami. What do you remember about Chevis Jackson from coach covering him up there?
Yeah, just, a solid coach. I think his resume kind of speaks for itself when you look at what Marshall has done as far as putting defensive backs in the NFL. Nazeeh Johnson has had a good career with the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, back-to-back Super Bowl champs is a good way to start your career there. But Mike Abraham, Stephen Gilmore, of course, the brother of Stephon Gilmore. There's some natural talent there, but still, I saw quite a few guys develop under Chevis Jackson, and I know that was a big loss for the Marshall secondary, but he's got his fundamentals down. He teaches open field tackling well, and just teaches. Gets guys in the right position, and I think when you look at especially last year. There were a lot of young bodies in that Marshall secondary. And, Dyoni Hill was one of those who kind of took a really, really big step forward in 2023 under Chevis Jackson. And so for them to be back together is big, I think, for that duo. But, Jackson's just he's got some skill. He knows ball, and, he gets the best out of his guys.
Is he a recruiter? I know you've had some really good recruiters on staff going back to Doc Holliday. Is Chevis Jackson known as an aggressive recruiter, or is he more of like get you in there and then coach you up?
I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think that there were any, super, super highly touted, defensive back recruits that came into Marshall. Especially out of high school, they got some guys through the portal, but I think the bulk of what he did was getting the most out of his guys that were there, and kind of nurturing them along. And I think one big piece that he added last year for Marshall was JJ Roberts, a hometown kid from Huntington who actually had gone to Wake Forest and transferred back in. And he ended up being a huge part of that defense and that secondary. I think he knows how to identify guys' strengths. And I think that's what he kind of recruits to as well. Guys that he knows that he can he can get the most out of when he gets them in.
So let's start with one of those guys, obviously Dyoni Hill. What do you remember about him? I don't know if you followed him as a recruit or just as a young player that just got to Huntington. What do you remember about Dyoni Hill as far as a young player?
Yeah, so a big thing that Marshall likes to do, and I think it's this way across the country, is they have a huge emphasis on using special teams to get you playing time. And Dyoni Hill was one of those who, kind of paid his dues on special teams. He appeared in 10 games in 2022 and had just one tackle. And that came in the bowl game at the very end of Marshall's 9-4 season. But to be able to be as consistent as he was on special teams, that was what gave him the opportunity to start early on last season. I think he started 9 games for Marshall last year and appeared in 10 in that secondary, and kind of came on the scene. He had an interception at NC State that was a good read on the ball, and just continued to show his ability not only to play the ball in the air, but also to make some open field tackles and to really stabilize the secondary that needed it last year, to be quite frank. I don't know if it was the plan to give him as much run at Marshall as he did or as he got last year, but that was the circumstance they were in because of some injury, and he made the most of it and kind of showed the player that he really is, and he's got a bright future.
Yeah, Luke, it's interesting because that's what I was going to ask you about. You mentioned the open field tackling. 55 tackles for a cornerback is pretty impressive. And by the way, it's not like he's the biggest guy either, right? So it seems like there's some room to grow for him if he continues to put on that good weight, right? And it seems like a guy who has the versatility to play some different spots in that secondary as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And when you look at that tackling number, one, it's not a great indicator of what's going on up front when a bunch of guys get into the secondary. But Hill also showed off some quickness there, and you hear the phrase all the time. He's got a nose for the football, and I think that's who Hill is. Certainly, he's still very green. I think, and I don't think we've seen his full potential yet. Hopefully reuniting with, not only Chevis Jackson, but defensive coordinator Lance Guidry will continue to tap into that potential.
Where did he line up, if you recall, as far as was he only playing the outside? Did he play in the nickel at all? Did he play any safety? How did they use him in Marshall?
It was mostly on the outside, but they rotated a lot of guys in different positions in the secondary. But I think he played his best outside, and and he was able to show off some skills to defend the ball downfield. There were a lot of teams that took advantage of Marshall deep last year, and so he kind of got thrown into the fire, but came out pretty well for himself.
And you've touched on some of this, but if you were to define the strengths of Hill's game, what would you say?
I just think it's speed and versatility. He's kind of like I've already said. He's got a nose for the football, knows where to be, and he plays smart. He's not going to put himself in too many compromising positions. At least he didn't, at Marshall. And he's got a hard work ethic. And I think that when you've got those three things, football, you got a nose for the football, you can play in different positions. I think that bodes well for you.
On the flip side, obviously, Marshall's really been a very good program, 10 out of 11 bowls, I believe, the last 11 years. So it's not like he just showed up and played. You mentioned he had to kind of pay his dues on special teams. What were the areas that he was working on to break into the line that you would say are areas of growth for him?
Yeah, I think that, when you look at just getting to know the defense, because some of the way Marshall practices, special teams doesn't take up a huge chunk of the practice time, but, there are a lot of guys that get a lot of practice reps. And I think that Hill was one of those who just kind of took his time to learn the system, know where he was going to be able to play and play well. And then, just continue to hone in on those, those areas of his game. And I think you saw that with the way he played on the outside. Didn't get too much run in the nickel or at safety or anything like that, but still has the skills to be able to to move around if needed. And so I think that's just where I saw him grow the most, was just with patience and with understanding where he fit in the system best, that was going to be best for the team and for him personally.
Now, Luke, you mentioned Lance Guidry, obviously came over to Miami last year, did a very good job, I think most Canes fans would say, and he brought another guy with him, essentially, as Elijah Alston comes down to Miami earlier in the transfer window here. Your memories of him, seems like a guy who was very productive there, and another guy with some versatility to obviously rush the passer, but make plays all over the defense.
Yeah, I think when I think of Eli Alston, it's another one of those guys that kind of paid his dues coming up. Marshall has been, historically pretty deep on the defensive line. When you look at guys like Owen Porter, Kobe Cumberlander, who have kind of hogged a lot of those reps and a lot of the attention up front. It's been hard for guys to break through. And Alston was one of those that did. And I think, he was going to be a huge part of this defensive line at Marshall in the upcoming season, but obviously has that big, that big playability. It doesn't have a whole lot of speed. I think he and I joked after it was the Old Dominion game last year. He had like an 80-yard pick six, and I never thought he was going to reach the end zone. And I don't think he did either there for a second. But he's got a nose for the football as well. I keep using that term, but there it is. So I think that he's one of those guys that is going to fit in really well. Not so big that he can't move, but obviously, an extremely talented guy who found a way to break through on a very talented defensive line group.
Yeah, Danny and I had a chance to actually interview him after the spring game. We had an event at a local venue next to campus, and was a great kid, really good personality. And sometimes when guys transfer to Miami, Luke, you get a little, you have a little skepticism to see how is he going to adjust down here. It's a big city. It's not your normal college town. And it seems like he came down here with the right attitude and mindset, understanding that reuniting with Coach Guidry, it's an opportunity for him. No disrespect to Marshall's schedule, but what he's gonna face week in and week out here, an opportunity to showcase the next level. So it just seems like he, all around, it was a very good addition to this Miami locker room.
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret that's a tougher schedule. Although Marshall has kind of a beefed up non-con this year, but I think that last year was different on defense for Marshall, because when you look at obviously losing Lance Guidry, and then they bring in Jason Seymour, who came from Georgia Tech. He was the linebackers coach down there, and they more or less admitted this spring that last year was kind of just a makeshift of let's see what we've got, because I don't want to change too much. These guys were good in the system they had last year, so make some make some changes here and there, but nothing wholesale. And I think that that kind of played into Alston's strengths, and he'll continue to do that down there. And he's focused. I don't think there was ever a time that we interviewed him where he said more than he needed to, or and he just kind of kept his nose to the grindstone, and and it paid off for him.
Pete mentioned we interviewed Elijah. One thing that jumped out to me was his size, because I kind of pigeonholed him as a smaller, just designated pass rusher only, but he was pretty big, to at least from what we could see, bigger than at least I expected. And I noticed on film, he played a lot of different spots on that front. So you have more insight on that. How was he used at Marshall in terms of across the front?
I think you hit it right on the head. There were times when he would be a straight pass rusher. Other times he'd drop back into coverage. I think you saw that on that interception clip. That was kind of how a lot of those guys were used. Is kind of a be where you need to be and be where we need you to be. And he showed that he could play both. You mentioned his size, and he doesn't appear to be as big as he really is out there. And I think that's part of because of the way he moves and the way he gets around. But certainly a talented player with a lot of upside, and he's kind of shown that throughout his career.
Let me ask you, Marshall's had, you mentioned Micah Abraham, Nazeeh Johnson, Gilmore, Chris Jackson also drafted. That's in the defensive backfield. Defensive end, you probably have to go back to Vinny Curry. But I mean, you guys have seen NFL players, and clearly playing at that level of competition, those guys tend to stand out, and you're probably pretty good about saying this guy's a chance to play professionally. Do you see either of these guys as guys that have a chance, maybe not be first round picks, but to be drafted late or to play professionally? Or do you see them more as guys that could be, good college players in the ACC or something else?
Yeah, I think that's, it's a really good question, because I think when you look at guys sometimes that stand out at the group of 5 level, sometimes they transfer and they disappear, because maybe their production drops or whatnot. But I think this is a unique situation for both of those guys. Getting back with their old defensive coordinator, back in Dyoni Hill's case, with his old position coach. And I think those guys have a chance to take a step forward. But just because of, just because of the upside that he has, I think Hill maybe has a better chance to develop into an NFL prospect. He's got 2 years of eligibility left, and has shown some flash in different areas, and I think that that kind of works in his favor, because the reality of it is, there are going to be a few defensive linemen every year that draw a whole lot of attention, but I think it's easier to sneak in there as a defensive back.
And I think look, he keeps putting that weight on.
Mm-hmm.
Then that'll be working in his favor for sure. And look, I think the interesting thing with both of them, obviously they're reuniting with Guidry and Hill with Chevis Jackson, but you would think that they wouldn't have come down if the coaches wouldn't have wanted them if they didn't think they could play at Miami, could play at this level, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's spot on. They've got enough respect for those guys. I think to not put them in a situation, where they're gonna, fall off and hurt their draft stock or hurt their future in professional football. But more than anything, those guys know they're playmakers. When you're talking about the coaching staff bringing them in, and sometimes that shows how much trust they have as coaches in those players. And I think that's kind of the situation they're walking into, and certainly, excited to watch them down there at the U.
Yeah, look, I think it shows a lot of respect for Marshall's program that these guys come in with position groups that have multiple 4-star, 5-star type players, and they say, a guy I had at Marshall can really help this group right away and play. So I think that's a vote of confidence in Marshall as well. One last thing, and I'd forgotten about this until you mentioned it before the show, that Coach Mirabal, Miami's offensive line coach, actually I think got a start right at Marshall or FIU to Marshall.
And Marshall.
Yeah. So what do you remember about him as offensive line coach?
I just remember he's one of the feistiest little dudes I've ever encountered. And he might be the smallest offensive line coach in the history of football, but certainly, there's some knowledge of ball there, and he, for a guy of his stature, he sure gets those big men in the right spot and moving right.
Luke, man, appreciate you joining us again. This is gonna be an interesting team for Marshall fans to watch, I think, just because of all the ties there, and hopefully they make they make the program look good and perform. But really appreciate you joining us again. We put up Luke's Twitter right there. Go follow him and keep track. And how by the way, how's Marshall looking this year? I mean, you guys made 10 out of 11 bowls. You guys think is it going to be a bounce back year, or how are we looking?
Yeah, it's just that there's been a lot of turnover. I think from December to now, there's been about 40 different guys move off and onto the roster, and I think there was a graphic from ESPN about how much production returns from last year, and I think it was like 54% of Marshall's production last year. They lost a lot, but they're changing offensive systems. This will be a little bit more of a defensive system that Jason Seymour is able to put in. So the team's going to look different, but I think they've got their guys in, and kind of a revamped offense. And I think they brought in like 2 transfer quarterbacks, and so it'd be a fun quarterback competition, and it'd be fun to see what they bring out defensively after a year that was a little bit of a disappointment for those inside the program and fans of the program at 6-7, with that bowl loss in the Frisco Bowl. But certainly, excited to see what this year brings. Challenging non-conference schedule. That they've got road games at Ohio State and Virginia Tech this year. So. Pretty early on in the year, and I think luckily for them, they've got a bye week in between, because after that NC State game last year, which they fought hard but lost. They came out a little beat up in that one. I didn't think that served them well the rest of the year, but certainly should be fun. But it's one of those things that I've looked at the schedule over and over again, and I have a hard time predicting it, because I'll look one day and I'll see 8-9 wins, and then I'll look the next and I'm like, well, do I really see 8-9 wins, or is it 7 and you get in the bowl game and see what happens? But
sounds like us as Canes fans, man.
Yeah.
So we get what you're saying 100% for sure. But Luke, man, thank you so much for joining us today. Great intel from you. And listen, the way things are looking, this may not be the last time we talk, right? So appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. Feel free to reach out anytime.